We would like to start now the conference. First of all, we would like to, you will be the first ones to see our very new teaser on the index.
Women are challenged, despite their solid ambitions and education. Gender inequality slows down Europe. Gender inequality prevents women and men from realizing their full potential. The Gender Equality Index shows a score of only 52.9 out of 100 for the EU. We are only halfway towards gender equality. Find out more about the Gender Equality Index at eige.europa.eu.
We disclosed you the score even before we will have the presentation, but it's only a small detail of everything we are going to speak today. Today we are going to talk about women and men of Europe. And we will discuss, we go back in time, starting from 2005, 2010, and 2012, to see the trend of development of the gender gap, which is either positive or negative. And this trend visualizes in a graphic, in numeric format, visualizes the different outcomes of the common for all of us policies at the European Union level, at the member states level. And I can assure you the outcomes and the differences are quite big, not only between the two genders, but also among the member states. If we take policies and we look at the index, what do the gender gap shows in some of the indicators, in some of the domains? We see then that the smart, inclusive, sustainable growth strategy also can get some interesting ideas from what the index shows. And if we take full-time employment equivalent as an example, and we look at the trend, so we see then that in 2012, the gap, the gender gap towards women, that means women are less off in that sense, is 17 percentage points. And that means that inclusive growth also can foresee measures for that. If we look at labor market segregation, and we look at those areas which are more like dominated, as we say, or overrepresentation of women in the areas and the sectors, so we see that the trend has also the negative trend, the negative development. The gender gap has increased from 20.5 percentage points in 2005 to 21.7 percentage points in 2012. So inclusive growth also has some challenges. If we look at smart growth and we talk about the knowledge, we look at the index. What does the index say about that? How that can feed into the policy of smart growth? And then we see the tertiary education and the sectors, how women and men choose the sectors. So we see the trend also increasing. The gap is increasing from 22.5 to 23 percentage points in 2012. Smart growth, educational attainment, the ones which is the future for us. We all know now that if we go back in 2005, we see that the gender gap was, at that time it was more boys attaining in the attainment at the tertiary education level than girls. Now, around 2008, the trend shows that now it's the only domain where the gap changed direction. So now we have 1.3 percentage point of the gap towards women. And the positive changes, of course, there are always positive changes, and we are very happy about that. So one of those which we, at least at the Institute, are really discussing very much is this positive change in caring. The men and women who care for the children or grandchildren more than 1 hour every day, or during the week you count all this. And there you see that from 16.6% now no, that is the opposite. Now the gap is increased. That is completely my misunderstanding, right? Because the gap, I was thinking that is a positive, but that means that we have to work, because the gap has increased from 16.6 in 2005 to 17.2. So, which shows that it doesn't change much. Despite the efforts, despite the policies, still women take the majority of time. But the real change where is the positive trend we see, it is in political power. And we all are very happy about this. And then we think that those changes, both in the parliament, in the also national parliaments, that those changes among decision makers, the decreased gender gap, will be able to maintain, to sustain the positive trend. And the tool, which we will show in 2 years, we hope, will give even more of the positive trends, because decision making is very important. It influences the lives of women and men in Europe, and it also influences the outcomes. Now, before we start over to the most distinguished guests of our conference to open, I would like you all to, again, like we did last time, to see, first of all, who was the group who did all this magnificent tool, the European Gender Equality Index. And I would like to ask again our team to stand so you can talk and show who they are, so you can talk in the pauses. And here are our members of the team. And I would very much like, on behalf of the Institute, the working group, and also to thank Anne-Lauren Humbert, who is not here. She was really extremely important for the index. She wrote and did very, very big share of the work. And Merle, who is not here, on vacation. So, and then also the other part of this, because the index is a product of all of us. Not only because I hope you will use it, but index is also a part of the common efforts. So besides the team, it's also the working group which helped and guided us. It is the Commission, DG Justice and Eurofound. It is the 2 agencies which gave us very useful, important information. So it's Eurofound, which together with social partners developed the new variables, and it's Fundamental Rights Agency. So, of course, I didn't mention everybody, but next time we will work on some new dimensions, and I believe there will be very many new organizations and actors who will help us to develop this tool. So, welcome very much for the, like we say, second index, the index 2015, which shows many new things. And I would like now to welcome the first, like we say at EIGE, the first in history, the commissioner who has in the title gender equality, which is so important. So, dear Commissioner Jourova, please take the floor.
Dear Vice President, Madam Lunacek, dear Minister, Madam Mutsch, dear Director, Madam Langbakk, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, It's an honor for me to be among you today, and it is also an honor to be surrounded by 3 women leaders at today's conference on gender equality. I did not realize that I am the first historical commissioner. Sometimes I feel myself to be historical, but it's another story. Gender policy is around 1/3 of my portfolio, but not the least important, because I must say, I always say that my portfolio is full of matters of brain, justice, some technical matters concerning economy of Europe, but also there are matters of heart, and there I think belongs gender policy and fundamental rights area. So thank you for nice welcome and for invitation. Let me congratulate the Institute for launching the 2nd edition of the Gender Equality Index. You might know that I come from my previous job where I was devoted a lot to strategic planning and projects planning and indexes and measurable indicators. So I am very much in favor of measuring results which we want to achieve, or measuring results which reflect that something is wrong, which is also this case. So I am a natural ally in your efforts to do this in the area of gender equality as well. In my view, the index has become a valuable tool to measure results and contribute to evidence-based policy making. The statistics it provides have shed light on the daily lives of women in the EU, and what they reveal is unacceptable. Gender inequalities, discrimination, and violence remain the daily reality of too many women across Europe. As the European Commissioner responsible for gender equality, I am fully committed to progress in equal opportunities for men and women, to address violence against women, and to tackle the remaining gender gaps. As we are currently evaluating the situation and reflecting on the future priorities and actions, the timing of the index is very handy. Let me give you 3 ideas on how I see Gender Equality Index as a good tool to help us to achieve our policy objectives. First, the index measures the level of achievement in gender equality per member state. For example, the report launched today shows that things are gradually looking up across the EU. However, at national level, the index gives a different picture. If 10 member states have stepped up their efforts to narrow the gap between men and women, 5 other countries have actually let the gap grow even bigger. Second, the index compiles the 8 domains of gender inequality in one single tool. This includes important aspects such as the position of women and men in the European labour market, the differences between women and men in terms of education and training, and on the prevalence of violence against women. They all appear side by side, which helps decision makers spot where things are looking good and where things need improving. For example, the Gender Equality Index 2015 reveals that the domain of power has shown the greatest progress among all the domains, with scores rising from 31.4 out of 100 in 2005 to 39.7 in 2012. Despite this, men's overrepresentation in decision-making positions remains prevalent in all member states, both in politics and in the economy. Finally, the index is a reliable resource for new ideas to feed into political discussions. Take, for example, the time that men and women respectively spend on caring for others, children or family members. The index highlights large gender disparities in that specific area and calls on decision makers to get a better understanding on what remains the greatest barrier to gender equality. As a Commissioner for Justice, I have to share with you also finding from the index which drew my attention and could be an inspiring example for all of us involved in improving our justice systems. Did you know that women who live in countries advocating gender equality will be more willing to report acts of violence to the police? Could we deduct that putting better gender equality into practice enhances women's trust towards judicial authorities? I am looking to the interesting debate on this finding. In other words, Gender Equality Index interpretation helps policymakers to better articulate their policy objectives and provides feedback to the adopted measures through providing information on individual member states. I call on the Institute to continue the work and invite us to exploit the potential of the index to the fullest. But for evidence to be recognized and useful, it needs to be the right kind of evidence. We have to ensure that the index is providing the most recent data. That may sound to you as something obvious, is in fact a very demanding task. In order to keep the interest in the index going, it is my recommendation that regular consultations are held with stakeholders, in particular those involved in the policy making, and that adequate feedback mechanisms are put in place. Ladies and gentlemen, today's conference is a great opportunity to discuss and exchange views on the many challenges ahead of us, and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Let me pass now on the floor to Madame Lunacek, Vice President of the European Parliament, and thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Director of the Institute, dear Commissioner, dear Minister, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here, not just in my function as a member of the European Parliament, but representing the European Parliament as one of its vice presidents and one who takes part in the working group on gender and diversity in the European Parliament. And I'm honored to speak to you at this opening, and we'll be listening in also for the next hour to the important debates. This index is one that reveals power structures in member states and at the European Union level. And I really like the fact that in the index, in the description of the things, very often you talk not just about the underrepresentation of women, but you talk about the overrepresentation of men, and men being favored. And I think that's what we also need to take into account, because very often it looks like, oh, these women, they simply don't do enough and they cannot do it and they don't dare, and there's always the problems with the women. Well, I'm not saying that the problem is only with the men, but there is a kind of system that reflects this favoring of men. And I can use a quote that we did in the European Parliament report in 2012 already, done by Sirpa Pietikäinen, a European People's Party member of Finland. And in this report on power and how women can and gender equality can be achieved in power structures, I quote, "Whereas today an informal system of quotas is de facto in play, where men are privileged over women and where men choose men for decision-making positions, which is not a formalized system, but nevertheless a systematic and very real, deep-rooted culture of positive treatment of men." So that was done by the Parliament as such, not by some feminists or so. Yes, by feminists as well. But this was the Parliament saying that. And it was repeated this year, just a couple of weeks ago, in the report by Maria Neuchel on the gender equality and gender equality structure, where this report says, "Whereas gender quotas and zipped lists in political decision-making have proven most effective tools in addressing discrimination and gender power imbalances and improving democratic representation on political decision-making bodies." So I'm using these quotes just to support what you have done in this index, which will be very useful with the work also in the Parliament, because it shows that the gender gap, the gender pay gap, the glass ceiling, which it wasn't the ceiling in the video you had, it was the doors that didn't open even if you press. This kind of situation has to change. And I'd like to tell you why I think this is so important. Not just because of women's own right to have a good career, to have a job, to do something in our lives that makes sense and that changes things to the better. But it is also about what kind of politics and policies are done. If we have a situation, and I mean, if we look at the last couple of years of debt crisis and economic crisis on our continent, and if we look at some of the data, one I remember you said that at the national banks in 6 member states, not even one woman, my own included, Austria. Yeah? I am sure if women and men were equally represented in economic bodies, in political decision making, women could even be overrepresented for a while. I wouldn't mind, to change balances. I think this severe austerity policies that we had gone through, and some countries more than others over the last years, wouldn't have been done in that way. Because we have sociological differences in the way we grew up. Women learn, girls learn to take care of others. I mean, in general, there's always exceptions to the rule. Boys learn to look about themselves, to put themselves in the center and be there and do what they want to do. So these kind of social issues are so important for women's and men's lives, and that's what we need to change as well. Empowerment is one of, and it includes the word power. And I'd like also to reflect on one thing. In English, it doesn't work that well. But in languages like French and Spanish, it's pouvoir, it's poder, and it means also that you can do things. Yeah? It's not just the power, sort of this kind of thing somewhere up there, but it means you can do things. And in my mother tongue, in German, it means Macht comes from machen, which means you can do things. So this kind of connection, I find it so important also for women in society to feel, oh yes, we can have power, and it makes sense to have power. And sometimes we have to do a little bit ourselves as well. It's this kind of training. I did that in my own life. Years ago, when I was in NGOs in my own home country, I taught myself to go up front in meetings and sit in the first rows and not in the back, and raise my hand at the beginning of the debates and not at the end also to say something. So these kind of things, it's also something I think that many of us, I think all of you who are here have already done that, but the younger generation I think also needs something on that. But I'm getting a bit far away from legal things and so on, but it's part of what we need and what has to be done. In the EU institutions, yes, we have been improving. But in my own, in the European Parliament, we have more female members of Parliament now than we had last time. But in our structures in the Parliament itself, unfortunately, we have to say that an aim that was put in 2009, an objective to be reached by now, to have 40% of women heads of unit, it's not much more than 30%. We have reached at other levels, we have reached more. But more has to be done. And since Commissioner is here, I just read yesterday that there was some promoting of Deputy Director Generals to Director Generals, 8 of them, 6 men, 2 women. That's what I read. If you can correct it, great, if it gets better. But I think there really time is here now to change that. And I can tell you, I'm really, and I think many of us, are really tired of listening, oh, this has to be done and that has to be done, and some more here and some more there. These things have to change, and they have to change quickly. We need laws for that, and we need society to change. The index that you have presented is an important one. And I would just like to tell you what the European Parliament is demanding from the Commission to do. Because, as you know, unfortunately, we cannot do laws ourselves as Parliament. We need the Commission to propose them. So we want binding quota system, and in that I know it's the Council, so this is the Minister who's going to speak after me. We need binding quota system. We need binding legislation to end violence against women. The Parliament demanded that at the beginning of last year, binding legislation for that. We also would need the maternity directive, because that would not only, maternity leave directive, it would not only provide women to have a safe time around children, the 20 weeks that the Parliament proposed, and that was the original proposal, it would also provide fathers to stay home from their jobs, paid leave, 2 weeks, not more, just 2 weeks, right after the baby is born, together with the mother. And that would teach companies and business that also men have children and stay at home when they have them, which is important for not having all that burden, under inverted commas, on women's shoulders. And we need an EU-wide strategy and action plan to combat all forms of violence against women. We need the Equality Directive, we need a roadmap against homophobia, and we also need a separate strategy on gender equality and women's rights post-2015, because it's going to be ending at the end of this year. So we need that to go ahead. And let me finalize to tell you the European Parliament is on women's side to push ahead. And it's not just good for women, it's good for all of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we will see what the third body of the European Union, the Council, the future presidency will say. And I'm very happy to invite Minister Mutsch also to say a word.
Madam Vice President of the European Parliament, dear Commissioner, Madam Director, honorable colleagues and guests, ladies and gentlemen, when Virginia asked me to participate today, I agreed immediately because it would give me the opportunity to out myself as a great fan and frequent user of the Gender Equality Index. So thank you for having me today. As example, I can mention that the Luxembourgish government used GEI as it will be better. The GEI is a factual basis for the definition of its main priorities in the field of gender equality and for the presentation of its strategy towards a better balance between men and women in decision making. Through our national action plan making gender equality a reality, the government is committed to promoting equality between women and men in all areas and at all levels of society. Such ambitious goals can only be reached if we are able to measure. And you all said, you all confirmed, to measure progress through objective evaluations using reliable and scientific indicators. The GEI is indeed a very helpful instrument in this context, and I want to thank the EIGE for having elaborated such a user-friendly tool, giving an easy overview of the very complex field of gender equality and for updating it on a regular basis. I am aware that not everybody liked the idea of one more rating system among EU member states. I'm not talking about the European Song Contest now, but I must say that competition can be very productive and constructive, and that positive results and good practices should be considered as a source of inspiration and boost developments at the national level. Talking about the national level, the GEI helps to measure the success of our policies and to readjust them if necessary. As I don't want to take out the suspense of the next session, I will only share with you some figures concerning my own country. Having read the report, the general gender equality index passed from 53.7 in 2005 to 55.2 in 2012. Wow, yes, it's a positive trend. It's a bigger step than the EU average. It confirms that we are moving in the right direction. but in fact we are talking about a figure of 55.2 on a scale from 1 to 100, where 100 means real equality between men and women. A progress of 1.5 points in 7 years, that means 0.22 per year. With such a constant evolution, and we all know that at least in some domains, the evolution is not constant, but rather characterized by ups and downs, we need at least 200 years more to reach equality in my country. Ladies and gentlemen, this is for sure not acceptable for anybody here in the room. That's why we urgently have to give a boost to our efforts to speed up the transition from legal to real equality, from theory to practice. It's time for concrete and brave action, and it's time for more concrete and more brave actions. The Luxembourgish government has fixed very ambitious targets. In our weakest domain of the index, the one equality in decision making. First, we are willing to achieve a balanced representation of women and men on the boards of public companies. Therefore, we fixed, for the first time in our history, the concrete goal of 40% of the underrepresented sex, which are mostly women, on public companies' boards by 2019. The same applies to private companies in which the state is a shareholder. Moreover, concrete incentives, such as positive actions, will be strengthened in private companies as well as in public institutions. Second, as far as political decision-making is concerned, I will present before the end of the year a bill to change the legislation on the public financing of political parties by introducing a link between the financing of political parties and compliance with the 40s quota of the underrepresented sex on the list of candidates for legislative and European elections. At the European level, Luxembourg strongly supports the proposal of the directive aiming to ensure a more balanced representation of women and men on the boards of listed companies. I can assure you that we are putting in all our efforts during the upcoming presidency to try to reach a common council approach in this file. As the last presidency of the trio, and in addition to the work done by Italy and Latvia, we will focus on 3 priorities: gender and the EU 2020 strategy, equality in decision-making, and gender mainstreaming. We therefore will focus on the economic relevance of equality on the labor market. And coming back to the GIE, these discussions have to go hand in hand with the sharing of responsibilities between men and women in private and in family life. At EU average, the domain of time remains the weakest with 37.6 points. But if we want to have more women on the labor market, more women in top economic positions, more women in political decision-making, we have to convince men to take over other duties, especially concerning the care of children and elderly people. Combining work and family life is a challenge for women and for men. To achieve a better gender balance in all areas of life, we have to consider men and involve them in our discussions and in our work. We have to make them feel concerned, because they are concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, the problems are well known by each of us. The update of the GIE confirms them. A whole lot of actors have to work together and to find successful solutions. Government, and I mean every minister, and not only the ones in charge of gender equality, social partners, civil society, and the European institutions. In this context, I would like to underline the urgent need, dear Commissioner, for a standalone post-2015 strategy on gender equality from the European Commission. This will be considered and appreciated as a signal and a strong commitment for the Commission towards reaching gender equality. Women are not a minority, but represent more than 50% of the population. They deserve 100% equality, and so do men. I do not want to end without congratulating EIGE for its 5th birthday and wishing a successful future to the whole team of the Institute and of the GEI. I hope to meet a lot of you in Luxembourg on October 15th, 2015, when EIGE will present the main findings of the report on women and decision-making, prepared for the Luxembourgish presidency in the context of the follow-up of the Beijing Platform for Action. Thank you so much, and good luck for all of us.
I was addressed several times here, and you know, I could not leave without commenting it. So thank you for all questions, because it reminded me that I did not say the most important things here. But the speech was not bad. Yeah. But, yeah. As for the changing of the management in the Commission, yesterday we had a long discussion about it on the college with Mr. Juncker and Madame Kristalina Georgieva, who is responsible for this heroic task to choose or to select the people and to propose them for the heads of DGs and deputy heads of DGs, which are the top managers of the Commission. And she said, to my big regret, we only have 7 new directors of DGs. So you were right, but you said only half of the thing, and I reacted on it because I said, please, let's tell to the public that this is our failure, that we only have 7 new heads of DGs. But at the same time, what Kristalina said yesterday, we need to have a long-term plan to have in the pipeline enough women, because she desperately wanted to select more women to the positions. But you know that we have quite rigid procedure and the career rules, and there were no women to get hired to the positions of the directors. So we got a very toughly formulated task. We who are going to have to fulfill the positions of the deputy directors general to choose women, because they need to get first to this stage and then to go on. So yes, low number. But at the same time, we want to be clear that we understand that this example will be important for others, and we have a long-term plan to have more women in the positions. So we had a long discussion about it, and I really wanted to stress here that we ourselves are quite very unsatisfied with the result. Strategy. Thank you for support. The strategy or the priorities for the new policy paper for 2016 to 19 is now under consultation. The consultation will be closed by mid-July. We already collected more than 4,000 comments. So you are invited. This evening we will have 4,200. Probably. So please contribute to this, and this will be only start of the continuation of the work on the strategy, which should be adopted in the college, I hope, by the end of this year, and will cover the years 16, 17, 18, 19. And one more thing, I want to have one important source for better strategy: the fair and proper evaluation of the old strategy. We need to be very fair about assessing what works and what doesn't work. That's why also I am now sending the letter to all the ministers of the member states to give me their feedback on the strategy, concrete questions, and I hope to get concrete answers soon from the ministers. So please contribute in the consultation process. Maternity leave, last point, and I promise you to finish because I know we have our panelists to follow. Maternity leave is a painful topic because I really would like to promote it, but there is a strong resistance at the side of the member states. And recently we had a discussion about it on the plenary of the European Parliament. You were there. Remember, there was repeated so many times, and now listen. It's women's right to have babies. What? What a stupidity. Is it a luxury or hobby for women to have babies? The society does not need the children? And let's to be a little bit brutal, the society doesn't need the future taxpayers? Look at the demographic line. And when I heard this to be said with goodwill repeatedly that this is a woman's right, I realized that for the new legislation, which we are preparing for better balance between private and professional life, we must do all we can not to label it gender legislation. Because once we do it, it will slip to the category, what do you want? What do you women want? Do you want another legislation to make your lives even happier? No, this is the society which needs it. We need better balance of work and private life, not only for women, we need also for the men to be more invited to the care of their families. If we manage this, we will gradually be able to decrease also the pay gap, because this one-side care of the members of the families on the women's side, this is very important source for the pay gap. So we are working on the new legislation. Once we have it in a concrete proposal, we will probably, after all, withdraw the maternity leave directive. Before we have the new piece of legislation in proposal on the table, we will not do it. So this is the current report on maternity leave. But please be with us in understanding that this must be something new which will not speak about women's rights. Because believe me, it does not fly and it will never get enough support. I am saying it with regret, but this is reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I was thinking that just using some words which Commissioner was saying, the index came in time to take the new fresh look while the strategy is being prepared. The Vice President of the Parliament was talking that it is a good way to talk not about underrepresentation of women but overrepresentation of men. And then the Minister of the future presidency, I think, gave us a very, very convincing feeling that index will be used, but index is only a small part. But during the presidency, the minister will really put very much action in different initiatives. And I really believe that many of the objectives which Luxembourg will have during the presidency will be achieved, and the next index will show higher, more steep progress in many areas. Thank you very much. And it is really, we have the first session with the opening. We see the direction of the three European Union bodies, and we will start now with the next session. Thank you very much.